Good day, everyone. Welcome to one of our bite-sized videos, of which the purpose is to bring you, the integrator, up to speed with some of the basic concepts surrounding the Flowgear integration experience, as well as take a brief dive into one of our popular use cases. We're going to start by exploring the screen in front of you, the Flowgear console, which is the very first thing you'll be greeted with after logging into Flowgear. The Flowgear console provides access to all the components relevant to your integrations. From here, you can navigate to spaces that facilitate the setup for different parts of the integration. The three primary spaces that I'd like to briefly touch on are the workflows, connections, and drop points. Workflows can be found by navigating to the workflow section over here. And workflows provide a canvas from which you can drag and drop connectors and tooling provided by the Flowgear platform and construct your integration according to your business rules. We will go more in depth around workflows once we start to explore the specific use case. Connections, which we can navigate to by clicking over here, are spaces with which you can provide credentials that allow you to authenticate and connect to the systems which you would like to integrate with. We can go ahead and click on the new button over here, and we can go ahead and select a particular connector to work with, and choosing any one of the connectors we can see here within the connector section, such as Connect, Rise, Manage. You'll see there's a space in which you can plug in credentials that are relevant to that specific platform. You then have the option of providing credentials for different profiles, such as test and production, and you will be able to run your workflow or integration within that profile, which will then target that specific environment that you've set up. If you set up your credentials correctly, you can click on the play button over here, which, if successful, will give you a green banner telling you that the test succeeded. Finally, we have the drop point section. The idea behind the drop points is that it is our solution to hybrid on-prem and cloud integrations. You can install the drop point agent onto your on-prem servers, which will allow us then to talk to those servers within the scope of what you allow us to do using the whitelisting features. This means that we can talk to your file systems, we can talk to your AD, or we can move data between CRMs and ERPs that are not exposed to the internet with the drop point. These three spaces are the most important aspects related to the integrations themselves within Flowgear. For a deeper dive into the elements that make up the Flowgear console, please see our bite-sized video focusing on navigating the Flowgear console. Next, we're going to take a deeper dive into workflows and nodes. To do this, we're going to navigate to the workflow section, which we have done by clicking on this workflow over here. And from there, we're going to open up a new workflow by clicking on the new button right over here, at which point we're given the option to name the workflow, which we can name it appropriately, and click on the OK button over here. At which point you are then greeted with the Flowgear design canvas, the purpose of which is to provide you with the space to drag and drop Flowgear tooling in a specific sequence and order to string it together and then form the basis of an integration from end to end. Now, to start dropping the tooling onto the canvas, we're going to click this plus icon over here, which is going to open up a list of our nodes. All of these little blocks are what we consider nodes, and simply put, a node is a function or set of functions that have been encapsulated in a certain way that the most complex aspects of it have been obscured from you, and only the parts that you have to interact with are exposed. Now, within our nodes, we have distinct categories, and the first category you can see here are the connectors. The connectors are responsible for talking to the systems with which you would like to integrate, and so all of the complexity around authenticating and talking to these platforms is hidden behind the node, and again, only the most relevant aspects of the node are exposed to you. Triggers are nodes that allow you to determine how a workflow should kick off. So it gives you architectural freedom around when a workflow should run and how it should run. In other words, if you would like a workflow to run twice daily or every 15 minutes, or perhaps on receiving a particular email, triggers will facilitate that process. Processes are the nodes that are responsible for actually supplementing, transforming, and enriching the data sets that you need to work with. So when you receive data from system A and needs to be transformed to a different structure so that system B can ingest it, the processes are there to facilitate that functionality, as well as implement further business rules that you may have necessary for your integration. And then finally, evaluators are the nodes that are going to have a look at the result of a transaction and allow you to kick off additional supporting logic within that workflow. In other words, should a transaction fail, does somebody need to be emailed? Does someone have to be informed in some way? Does a report have to be built? So on and so forth. These four categories encapsulate all the tools that Flowgear provides the integrator, allowing you to build both simple and complex integrations within the scope of a simplified experience. For this particular bite-sized demo, we're going to be exploring the use of our SAP S/4HANA connector. And in this use case, we'll be using our connector to expose stock availability data to Shopify. This is a very common use case, as many e-commerce platforms benefit from having a source of truth for SKU and quantity information coming from your ERP or CRM. Let's take a look at what it might look like to build out a use case like this. The first thing we'll want to do is open up a brand new workflow. We can then name that workflow appropriately, and then we'll be looking at the Flowgear design canvas where we can start to put the appropriate nodes onto the canvas. For this particular use case, what we'll need is, first of all, the S/4HANA node, quick map, and then finally Shopify. The next thing we'd like to do is pick the appropriate connections for those particular platforms. In our case, we're picking connections that have been predefined, but we can open up one of those connections as if you were setting up for the first time, and you can see what that might look like. In the case of S/4HANA, you'll be expected to provide the relevant information for SAML token exchange. Once that's been provided, we can head back onto the canvas, where the next step is then to determine what action we'd actually like to perform. Now, Flowgear exposes a concept called samples, where if you head to options and say choose sample, you'll be given a list of potential actions that you can perform against that environment. We typically consume the vendor's documentation, so we can provide you with a list of those actions. And from here, you can search for something such as availability, where we can now get warehouse available stock. As we click on that, we may be presented with additional parameters. We can pick one of those parameters to hard code for 5 maximum rows. And then we have what is effectively a response payload, which is representative of what that's going to look like as it is provided by the API. We can make quick map aware of that response payload and do something similar for Shopify, where we will go ahead and pick the create a new product option. What we can do now is then hook up the result to the request, so that the quick map is now aware of both the source and the target payload that is requested, that is required for Shopify. Now that both the response and request payloads have been exposed to the quick map, we can head onto the quick map UI by clicking on change view, which then brings up 2 data trees, left-hand side S/4HANA, right-hand side Shopify. And the primary purpose of this tool is to give you a very easy mechanism by which you can move data across from point to point. A simple example of that might be putting your product number through to your title on the right-hand side here. And then immediately you will see a preview pop up, which is representing what that structure needs to look like, but with the data coming from S/4HANA. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to skip to a more complete mapping, and then we can talk through that. Here we have a more complete mapping, which is representative of what's going to be required to create a product inside of Shopify. And as you can see, we've added a couple of the fields on the left-hand side, pulled through to the fields on the right-hand side, as well as a couple of functions that we've used. So beyond the structural mapping of the data from point to point, what the quick map also provides is the ability to run additional functionality on these filter expression blocks, which will allow you to further enrich and supplement that data and basically adhere to whatever rules you require within your space. What those functions will look like is that they are closely modeled after Excel. We've done this for a reason, as we believe Excel is a low barrier to entry. So if you can think of functions such as left, lookup, sum, count, if statements, all of those are available to you here so that you can do what you need to do to get that data ready for the next step. In this case, what we've done primarily is we've hard-coded some values for some of the fields that won't change, as well as combine certain fields so that we can use them. And as our preview now stands, we have a single product with a particular title, and then we have variants of that product depending on what particular bin that item comes from. So as we're done here, we can close this off, and then we can go ahead and run this integration from point to point. What we have now is the activity log showing us what's actually occurred for each of these transactions. We can first of all take a look at what's coming out of S/4HANA, where we will see a list of a few items from the warehouses and bins. we can then take a look at the response from Quick Map, which is expected to have mapped that in the appropriate structure that is expected for Shopify. And then we can take a look at the Shopify response, which should give us a successful response payload to tell us that we have in fact created a product, and here's the variant that we've created. And as we navigate now to the Shopify sandbox and refresh the draft items or products, we can now see our product TG11 with 41 items in stock and 5 different variants. This particular workflow that I've built out will hopefully give you an idea of how we solve these kind of integration and automation challenges within Flowgear. The primary themes you have to keep in mind is that, first of all, we abstract complexity through these pre-baked nodes, such as the connectors for S/4HANA and Shopify. We then provide you with a list of functionality that you can pick through those nodes through samples, as I showed you previously. And then we also provide you with easy tools to go and do functions such as map that data from point to point. This particular solution is by no means production ready, and you will have to add additional error handling and additional logic to take this to whatever level of complexity that you require. However, all of that additional functionality can be implemented through the rest of the tools that we've provided on the canvas here. The last few features I'd like to touch on are Enterprise API, revision, and release management. I'd like to show you where you can find those features and what they're all about. So as we start with Enterprise API, it is effectively the ability to turn any workflow into an API-bound endpoint. So to do this, you can head to the workflow settings on the top here. You can then navigate to the section that allows you to apply a binding, as well as a custom domain, which is set inside of your site settings, and then finally a custom path or URL, where this URL is then secured against an API key or a certificate and can be reached by any third-party application or program to pass data into or get data from Flowgear real-time. The next feature I'd like to touch on then is revision management. You can find that feature by clicking on the revision history button over here. And ultimately what this is the ability to see when changes were made, who they were made by, and what those versions of the workflows look like. You can then open those versions of the workflows by clicking on the open button here for any particular version. We'll go to the very first one where we see there was actually nothing at that point. You can then choose to revert to this version if you would like to. The last feature I'd like to touch on is release management. You can find that feature by clicking on the promote workflow button over here. And what this brings up is a UI which allows you to merge your test into your UAT and eventually in production. Effectively, what this means is when a save is made, which I will do now, that save is not actually saved against the UAT or production environment until it's explicitly merged into that space. Now, you do not have to use this UI. The purpose of this particular feature is that it's actually backed, in this case, by GitHub, which provides you with a competent platform in which you can then run your change control policy that you've had up until this point. So if we open up this commit over here, we can find that it brings up the GitHub UI, which gives us an idea of what changed from then till now. From here, we can run a pull request or whatever it is that you've been doing up until now, and then obviously merge that into production. And that will then reflect inside of Flowgear here as a production-ready workflow. Now that we've shown you how to build a workflow, if at any point you have to go back and see what happened in that workflow, you can navigate to the workflow logs over here. For more detailed information on the topics we explored today, or if you would like to explore more complex aspects of the platform, including architecture and best practices, please join us for our technical certification course hosted on udemy.com. Also, go ahead and check out some of our other bite-sized videos for more common use cases and platform features. Also, please go ahead and visit our website where you can register for a free trial and complimentary proof of concept, have a look at our unique pricing model, or explore our list of over 200 pre-built connectors. Thank you very much for joining me for this short demo. Have a lovely day further.